Beryl is a middle-aged swordsman who runs a dojo in the middle of nowhere and lives a peaceful life. One day, while he is training, his father turns to him and says he really wishes he had some grandkids to look after. It's been years since Beryl took over as the instructor here, but he's still as maidenless as he was before. Beryl says he's been too busy with the family dojo to think about having kids, but his dad still wants him to at least try. He even suggests that Beryl should try rising up one of his female students so he can get married, but for ethical reasons he refuses. This dojo has been in Beryl's family for generations, and he has been diligently working as the instructor here ever since he took over from his father. Once he dreamed of achieving great things like becoming a famous sword master, but while he is definitely a better swordsman than the average person, he doesn't think his skills are worthy of the sword master title. With that said, he thinks of himself as a good teacher since many of his students have gone on to become successful swordsmen after graduating. Once practice is over, Beryl goes home to have dinner with his parents, but his dad is still insisting that he get married already. Beryl's dad tries to get his friend to pressure Beryl into finding a wife, but she says these things take time, so there's no need to rush him. However, she is still expecting Beryl to give her a grandbaby. Beryl chokes on his food a little because that's a lot easier said than done, especially since he doesn't even have a girlfriend yet, and it's not like a pretty girl is just going to show up at his door. A few seconds later, there's a knock at the door, and Beryl opens it to find a pretty girl standing there. She greets him as her master, and after taking a closer look at her, Beryl realizes that she is one of his former students, Alicia Citrus. Beryl invites her inside and offers her a cup of tea so they can catch up. Beryl remembers Alicia being a gifted student back when he trained her, but he never could have expected that she would become the commander of the Royal Knight Order. Anyway, Beryl asks her why she came to visit, so Alicia explains that part of her duty as Knight Commander is to train new recruits, so she took it upon herself to recommend Beryl as a special sword instructor. She even got approved as an Imperial Order, so she came to inform Beryl of the good news. Beryl never asked to become an Imperial instructor, so he considers declining the offer, but his dad tells him that people can get executed for disobeying an Imperial order, so he can't just ignore it. Alicia assures Beryl that he won't be killed if he refuses the offer, but he would probably face severe consequences for it, so he had better just go along with it. She already has a carriage waiting to take them to the capital, so they can leave now, and tomorrow, she'll give him the details of his new job. Beryl can't believe Alicia expects him to leave right now, but his dad is already on board with the idea, so he wishes Beryl good luck and tells him to find a wife for himself while he's in the capital. In fact, he says Alicia would make a great wife for Beryl, but Beryl tells him to stop saying stuff like that because it's making Alicia uncomfortable. There's way too much of an age gap for him and Alicia to become a couple, but Alicia mumbles under her breath that she wouldn't mind. Anyway, Beryl doesn't want to find out what the severe consequences are, so he agrees to the offer and accompanies Alicia to the capital. While the two of them are sitting in the carriage, Beryl notices that Alicia is still using the sword he gifted to her. This is a sword Beryl gives to all the students that graduate from his dojo, and Alicia has taken special care of hers ever since she got it. Beryl is glad to see that she values his gift so much, but he doesn't think sword is good enough for a knight commander like herself to use. He says she could find something better at any other blacksmith, but Alicia says this sword is the perfect one for her. Beryl assumes she must be so attached to that sword because as her former master, she still believes that anything she gets from Beryl is superior, but he is just an ordinary swordsman, so he'd never be able to cut it as a special instructor. Just then, Alicia speaks up and says she is so excited that the hillbilly sword master is finally coming to the capital. Beryl has no idea who she's talking about because he's not a hillbilly, and he's definitely not a sword master, but she tells him that he is well known in the world of swordsmanship. He has trained dozens of students who went on to become legendary swordsmen and adventurers, so he is a bit of a living legend, although Alicia isn't happy with the nickname he got. Beryl finds the story interesting, but he is convinced that Alicia is the only one who thinks of him as a sword master. Soon, they arrive at the royal capital, so Alicia drops Beryl off at an inn so he can rest, and she says she'll come pick him up tomorrow morning. The next day, Alicia takes Beryl to the castle and introduces him to the Knight's Order. She informs all of the recruits that Beryl is so strong that even she would be no match for him, so they should feel honored to have such a skilled man as their teacher. However, a couple of the knights don't think Beryl deserves to be in such a high position, and one of them is particularly unhappy about this. A little while later, Beryl is talking with Alicia in the halls, and she is congratulating him for officially becoming a special instructor. She tells him he only needs to come in to train the recruits 3 or 4 times a month so it shouldn't interfere too much with his usual lessons at the dojo. Just then, a girl comes running up to Beryl, and she is so excited to see her master again that she can hardly contain herself. Her name is Karuni, and she was a student at Beryl's dojo 2 years ago. He recalls that her dream was to join the Knight's Order, so he is glad to see that she actually made it happen. Although Karuni is still only a trainee, so she's still got a lot of work to do before she can become a proper knight. With that said, she is happy that she'll get to train under Beryl again, and the same goes for Alicia. Later that day, Beryl returns to his home, but as he opens the door, he finds that yet another one of his students has come to pay him a visit. His name is Randrid, and he came to introduce Beryl to his wife and newborn child. Beryl is happy to see that Randrid is doing well, but his father cuts him off and says Beryl shouldn't bother coming home until he has a wife and kid like Randrid over here. Speaking of Randrid, after graduating from Beryl's dojo, he went on to become a platinum rank adventurer, but now that he has a child he wants to retire and move back into the village. Platinum rank is pretty hard to achieve, so Beryl is surprised that Randrid is willing to give it up so easily. But then again, being an adventurer is dangerous works, so he probably doesn't want to risk it while he has a child to take care of. While he's here, Randrid promises to do his best to run the dojo, but Beryl has no idea what he's talking about. Beryl's father tells him that since Randrid is decently skilled, he can take over as the dojo's instructor, and that means Beryl won't have to stay here anymore, so his father is kicking him out, even though Beryl owns this house. The next day, Beryl explains the whole situation to Alicia, and explains that he needs to find a house here in the city. The inn he selected yesterday was a little too luxurious for him to stay there permanently, so he wants to find a place that's more affordable, and Alicia is more than happy to help him look. She asks him if he'd like to come and live at her house, but Beryl doesn't think that would be appropriate, so much to Alicia's disappointment, he turns her down. Alicia then asks him if he would like to get some food with her since it's lunchtime, and Beryl is fine with that, so they start heading for a restaurant. However, while they are walking, someone calls Alicia shameless for walking around town with a man and calling him master without a second thought. The girl and Alicia seem to have an unpleasant history together, and the girl thinks it is outrageous that a proud knight commander would be running around with a random man. Beryl has been trying to hide his face so he can avoid conflict, but the girl wants to see his face, so she pulls the map down, and as soon as she recognizes Beryl, she calls him master too. Beryl is confused by this because he has no idea who she is, so she reminds him that her name is Serena, and he once saved her and taught her how to use a sword. It takes a while for Beryl to remember, but he eventually recalls finding an injured girl 20 years ago. He took her in, nursed her back to health, and eventually taught her how to fight, but he hadn't seen her in over a decade, so he's pleasantly surprised to see that she's a black rank adventurer. Serena apologizes for not visiting Beryl all these years, but she's also curious as to why he is suddenly in the royal capital. Alicia explains that Beryl has been appointed as a special instructor for the Knight's Order, so he is moving to the capital, and she is here to help him find a suitable inn. However, Serena says she'd be much better at finding accommodations because as an adventurer, she was used to staying in inns. Serena and Alicia start arguing over who gets to go house hunting with Beryl, and Beryl has no idea why the two hate each other so much, but with their help, he eventually manages to find an inn that suits him. He thanks both of them for their help, but he asks them to please stop arguing with each other for his sake because he can't listen to any more yelling. Out of respect for Beryl, the two of them stop arguing with one another and quietly walk home. Beryl watches them from a window, and while he can't say he will enjoy all the excitement of city life, he thinks it's nice that he will have so many of his students around to take care of him. The next day, the Knight's Order is training as usual, and the Vice Commander, Blitz, is absolutely dominating all the others with his skill. After defeating his sparring partner, Alicia suddenly makes an announcement and informs everyone that there has been a change to the schedule. Instead of once a week, Beryl will be instructing them starting today, so she expects them to work harder than ever before. Beryl tells them all that he is happy to be here, but before he can begin his first lesson, Blitz approaches and says he has something to say. To be a special instructor for the Knight's Order, Beryl would need to possess a certain level of strength, so he is challenging him to a duel. Blitz isn't trying to be disrespectful, he simply wants to make sure that Beryl is good enough for the position, and as the Vice Commander, he is within his rights to ask for a duel, so Alicia sanctions it. Beryl really wishes she would stop agreeing to things on his behalf, but since Blitz challenged him, he has no choice but to get ready for the duel. Blitz is sure that Alicia only thinks highly of Beryl because he was her instructor when she was a kid, but that doesn't mean Beryl is cut out to be a special instructor for the Knight's Order, so Blitz is going to prove that by defeating Beryl right now. Beryl agrees with Blitz because he doesn't think he is good enough for this job, but it would look bad for Alicia if the man she recommended lost easily, so he decides to do his best against Blitz. The duel commences, and Blitz charges in to attack Beryl. Beryl begins parrying the attacks, and he is amazed by the sheer power and speed that Blitz possesses. But he knows that if he can deflect one of the strikes just right, then it will leave Blitz wide open and he can close in for a strike. That's exactly what he does, and Blitz is left speechless because in a real battle, he definitely would have died just now. That counts as a point for Beryl, so the two of them return to their starting positions and Blitz begins attacking again. Beryl still can't believe how strong Blitz is, but all his moves are predictable, so it was pretty easy for him to parry. Blitz realizes he won't hit Beryl if he doesn't go all out, so he uses his signature move to attack. The Warring Blade technique has so much power behind it that it can't be blocked or parried, so there should be no way for Beryl to win here. However, after Blitz swings his sword, Beryl disappears and reappears behind him with his sword next to Blitz's neck. With this, Beryl has officially won the duel, and Blitz isn't even mad about it. He is just amazed by the skill Beryl just displayed, and he apologizes for being so rude earlier. Later on, Blitz holds a party to welcome Beryl as the new instructor, but he still really wants to know how Beryl managed to counter his signature spin move. Beryl explains that all he did was move along with Blitz's rotation, which is how he ended up behind him, but doing it is a lot harder than Beryl makes it sound. In any case, Blitz is looking forward to training under Beryl, and so are the others. It's been about a week since Beryl started working as an instructor, and while two knights are busy sparring on the training grounds, he strolls over to give them a quick pointer. He's been observing their movements for a while now. Their swordplay is solid, but Beryl tells them they need to fix their spacing. He demonstrates how if you're too focused on tracking your opponent's blade, they can close the gap before you even notice. It might not seem like a big deal, but in an actual duel, even half a step can decide the outcome. Beryl figured he was just handing out some basic tips, but from the way everyone is staring at him like he just dropped divine wisdom, you'd think he reinvented swordsmanship. Ever since that duel with Blitz, the knights have been hanging on his every word like it's scripture. Honestly, Beryl can't complain because it's definitely made training smoother. After the session ends, Beryl takes a seat to cool off, and Blitz walks over and hands him a towel to dry off. A little while later, Karuni strolls up and asks if Beryl's got anything going on after this. He wasn't really planning on doing much, and that's all she needs to hear before asking if she can give him a little tour of the city. Beryl thinks about it, and realizes he hasn't really seen much of Baltrain yet, so he agrees. Karuni practically lights up with excitement, and darts off to change into something more casual. Elsewhere, Alicia is neck-deep in meetings with royal officials delivering an update on the Night Order, especially concerning their newly appointed special instructor. She assures them that Beryl has already gone above and beyond expectations. With nothing more to cover, the meeting wraps up. Before taking this role, people warned her. If you want to keep honing your sword skills, don't become knight captain. The bureaucracy alone will drag you down, but she didn't take this position for herself. She took it because it was the only way to bring Beryl here to the capital. Years ago, when Alicia was still a little girl, her parents brought her to Beryl's dojo to learn self-defense, and from the very first moment she met him she could tell he was a good man. And once she joined the dojo, Beryl had her practicing sword swings, hopping from stump to improve her footwork, and working on her strength with simple exercises. His methods might have been unusual, sure, but under his guidance, wielding a blade started to feel second nature. One day, Beryl asked Alicia if she wanted to spar with him, and she instantly agreed, excited to show off everything she learned. But the moment their mock battle started, she realized she couldn't find a single opening in his stance. Growing up under Beryl's guidance, Alicia had assumed that all sword instructors were as skilled as he was. But that illusion shattered one day during a group trip to a dojo-wide mock battle against another school. Her opponent in that match was the definition of sloppy. He left his guard wide open and charged in with the strategy of a 5-year-old, no patience, no control. And Alicia absolutely wiped the floor with him. So, the match was over before it even started. After the event, Beryl and the group were walking back to their dojo, and he seemed pleased that his students got to test themselves against different styles. Along the way, Alicia asked if their dojo was just better than the others because their dojo won every battle. Even Beryl himself won against their master. But Beryl didn't like thinking about it in terms of who's better. Sure, they won today, but the real takeaway wasn't about victory. It was about what they learned from the experience. Alicia got the message, but then she suddenly noticed that her hairpin was missing. She must have dropped it back at the other dojo, and it meant a lot to her. So, she told Beryl she'd go back to find it. By the time she returned to the rival dojo, she started searching around for it, only to see that the guy she beat earlier had picked it up. For a second, it looked like he might just hand it over and act like a decent human being. But of course, that would be too easy. So instead, he chucked the pin into the dojo behind him and told Alicia she'd have to fight all of them if she wanted it back. He may have lost earlier, but with backup, he was sure he could win this time. Now, judging by how bad their sword skills were before, Alicia probably could have taken them all down on her own. But she knew Beryl wouldn't want her using her training to beat people senseless out of pride. So, she stood her ground and braced herself for the hit, ready to take it rather than fight back. But before the guy's swing could land, Beryl stepped between them and took the blow himself. The strike didn't hurt him much, but he still winced a little. Looking straight at the group of boys, he calmly asked if this was really the kind of swordsman they wanted to be. The damn fool still doesn't get how messed up his actions are, so he winds up and tries to smack Beryl on the head this time. But Beryl effortlessly ducks under the swing and in one quick move knocks the sword right out of his hands. Before anyone can blink, Beryl is already parrying blows from the rest of the guy's friends, keeping them at bay with clean, controlled strikes. But before things can spiral any further, the head of the dojo rushes in. He heard the commotion and got there as fast as he could, and he's clearly ashamed of what he's walked into. With a heavy heart, he kneels down and offers a sincere apology to Beryl, swearing that something like this will never happen again under his roof. On the walk back, Beryl and Alicia walk side by side, and he explains that he had a bad feeling the moment she went back for her hairpin, so he followed her just in case. Alicia feels awful that Beryl ended up getting hit because of her, but he reassures her it wasn't anything serious. Besides, she didn't do anything wrong, so there's no reason for her to blame herself. If anything, he blames himself for letting his student walk into a place that could have been dangerous without supervision. Years pass, and Alicia is now sparring with Beryl again. His technique hasn't lost an ounce of sharpness, but this time as he swings, Alicia is actually able to keep up, and for the first time ever, she lands a clean point on him. Beryl is genuinely impressed with how far she's come, so he tells her that she's ready, it's time for her to graduate from the dojo. And with pride, he presents her with her ceremonial graduation sword. By this point, Alicia had come to understand that Beryl had no idea just how insanely talented he really was. She didn't want to leave the dojo because there was still so much she could learn from him. But she also didn't want to push back and make things complicated for him either, so instead of arguing, she made a promise to herself. She would prove to the world that Beryl's teaching stood above all others. That's why she joined the Knight's Order and took the entrance exam. And just as she had predicted, when the entrance exam finally came around, none of the other applicants stood a chance against the training Alicia received from Beryl. Even the proctor struggled to keep up with her, so if they couldn't handle her, they definitely wouldn't have lasted 2 seconds against Beryl. His reflexes were unreal, and his ability to read people mid-fight was on a completely different level. To Alicia, there was no question in her mind Beryl was the strongest swordsman alive. But the man himself had no clue how skilled he truly was. And knowing him, he'd probably be perfectly content staying some nameless sword master living a quiet life in the countryside. Alicia, however, refused to let that happen. So, bit by bit, she climbed her way up through the Knight's Order, gaining rank and influence, all with one goal in mind, giving Beryl the recognition he deserved. By the time she had finally earned the title of Knight Commander, it had already been a full decade since she left Beryl's dojo. And in that time, he somehow became even more impressive than she remembered. A part of her still feels a little guilty about appointing him as a special instructor without asking his permission first. But really, it was the only way to get him to leave that tiny village and give the world a chance to witness his greatness. Back at the training grounds, Alicia heads over to check in with Henblitz, and asks how the training went with Beryl today. Henblitz tells her it was fantastic because everyone learned something valuable from his lessons. Alicia then looks around, but she doesn't see Beryl anywhere, so she asks if he already went home. That's when Henblitz mentions that Kuruni had asked him to walk around town with her. As soon as she hears that, Alicia feels a little sting of jealousy. After all, Kuruni basically asked Beryl out on a date, and now she wishes she'd thought of it first. Meanwhile, Kuruni is showing Beryl around the city, happily pointing out the popular spots and hidden gems along the way. Beryl is honestly blown away because compared to the quiet life in his village, this place is practically bursting with energy. Though he does find it a little odd that she brought him to the Western District, since he thought the main attractions like the Church Palace were all in the Northern District. Kuruni admits he's right about that, but once you've lived here long enough, those places kind of lose their charm. You see them so often, they stop feeling special. Still, Beryl was hoping to check them out because that was actually something he had been looking forward to. As they continue strolling through the market, Beryl suddenly hears someone calling out to him. He turns toward the voice and spots a young woman approaching. She's cheerfully calling him master, which means she must have trained under him at some point, but for the life of him, Beryl can't figure out who she is. The girl seems pretty familiar with Kuruni too, but that doesn't help much either. Clearly disappointed that her teacher doesn't recognize her, the girl gestures to the sword at her side as a hint and says she's one of his graduates. Beryl thinks for a moment, then it finally clicks. Her name is Ficelle, and she used to train at the dojo alongside Kuruni, but that was years ago. Back then, she looked completely different, which is probably why it took him a second to place her. It's been 5 years since he last saw her after all, so of course she's changed. But from the looks of it, she's done really well for herself because she's currently one of the top officers in the capital's magic corps. Beryl is genuinely happy to hear that she's thriving, but he's also a little surprised because he doesn't remember teaching her anything about magic, so this career choice catches him off guard. Kuruni then asks Ficelle if she's out shopping, and Ficelle explains that she came to pick up some magic accessories. That term's unfamiliar to Beryl, so Ficelle picks up one of the items and explains that it's a tool that lets just about anyone use magic. Of course, she doesn't need them herself because she's more than capable of casting magic on her own. Beryl is pretty shocked to learn that. He knew Ficelle was good, but he didn't expect her to be this strong. Then again, she did say she's with the magic corps, so it adds up. Just then, a scream cuts through the street. A woman nearby yells that someone's stolen her purse. Beryl instinctively prepares to give chase, but before he can move, Ficelle steps forward and says she's got it covered. She draws her sword, channels magic into it, and sends a burst of energy flying toward the thief. In a flash, the magic wraps around the guy's legs, knocking him flat onto the street. Before he can scramble back to his feet, Kuruni swoops in and restrains him with ease. Beryl watches the whole thing unfold, impressed by how smoothly the two handled it, especially Ficelle because her sword magic is unlike anything he's ever seen before. Ficelle then explains that she wraps her blade in magic whenever she fights, and Beryl's sword training actually made it easier for her to tailor her spellcasting for close combat. She's genuinely thankful for everything he taught her, and Beryl in turn is glad to see one of his students still making good use of the fundamentals he drilled into them. The next day, Beryl wakes up very early and heads out for a walk around the city, like its morning routine. As he's taking in the sights, he hears someone calling out his name. He turns to look and sees a small girl standing a few feet away. Thinking she's a lost child, he bends down a bit and gently asks if she needs help finding her parents. That's when she gets loud and snaps at him for treating her like a kid. According to her, she's actually the leader of the entire magic corps. Beryl assumes she's just playing a fantasy game, so he doesn't bite. The girl is visibly annoyed that he won't take her seriously, so she holds up a finger and casually conjures a giant fireball to prove her point. At that moment, Beryl starts to believe she's telling the truth because no kid should be able to pull off something like that. She scowls at him again and tells him to stop calling her a kid. Her name is Lucy, and while she may look tiny, she insists she's a full-grown adult. Well, maybe grown is a bit of a stretch, but she insists she's much older than Beryl, and she won't tolerate being treated like a kid. Apparently, Ficelle had told Lucy all about him and hyped him up like some sort of sword legend, so Lucy came out to meet him in person. She's impressed that Ficelle turned out to be such a badass swordswoman and figures Beryl must be a top-tier teacher, but Beryl tries to downplay it, saying that Ficelle's progress is her own doing and he only helped her get started. Out of politeness, Beryl keeps walking with Lucy, but she eventually guides him toward a wide-open plaza, and any seasoned adventurer knows what's about to happen. Lucy tells him she trains her magic every single day, constantly trying to improve, but she doesn't have many people she can spar with. That's why, now that she's met the so-called sword legend in person, she wants to test herself against him. Before Beryl can even say no, Lucy hurls a fire blast straight at him, forcing him to leap backward to avoid getting roasted. He really didn't want to fight this early in the morning, but by the look in Lucy's eyes, it's clear she won't back off until she gets the duel she came here for. With no other choice, Beryl draws his sword and gets ready to face her head-on. Lucy then unleashed a massive fireball toward Beryl, forcing him to leap aside and sprint around the battlefield, carefully dodging every fiery attack she hurled his way. Fireballs continued raining down, but Beryl effortlessly evaded or parried each one. Seeing her current tactics weren't enough, Lucy switched gears and conjured 3 giant ice balls, sending them hurtling toward Beryl. Despite their enormous size, Beryl easily sliced each one cleanly in half with a single swift stroke of his sword. Witnessing Beryl's incredible swordsmanship firsthand, Lucy became even more invested in their duel. Beryl, however, wanted to wrap things up quickly, so he charged toward her, careful not to cause real harm, planning to use the hilt of his sword to simply knock her unconscious. But just as he came within striking range, Lucy engulfed herself in intense flames, forcing Beryl to immediately jump back. For a brief moment, Lucy had genuinely feared she might lose if she allowed him to close the distance. Realizing how tough it was to counter magic attacks using just swordsmanship, Beryl wished he could use magic too. Lucy, however, was nowhere near finished. She summoned even more fireballs, this time directing them behind Beryl, forcing him to retreat and dash around the field again. Lucy chapeled at the sight, amused by seemingly directionless Beryl's running. Since this was his first battle against a wizard, he truly had no prepared strategy. Eventually, the barrage of fireballs subsided, giving Beryl a moment to catch his breath. Just when he thought it was safe, Lucy dropped a massive ice ball from above, aiming directly at him. Beryl spotted it just in time, quickly parrying it back toward Lucy. Without hesitation, she shattered it easily with another burst of flame, but the collision created a dense mist that obstructed her vision. Seeing an opportunity, Beryl dashed forward through the mist to land a decisive strike, only for Lucy to unleash lightning magic at the last moment, knocking him backward. Despite his efforts, Beryl had yet to land a single solid blow, but neither had Lucy succeeded in hitting him, leaving her frustrated by their stalemate. Determined to end the battle quickly, Lucy decided it was finally time to use her trump card. Noticing her pause momentarily, Beryl believed he finally had an opening, but he abruptly halted his advance when he saw Lucy summon what appeared to be a black hole. He wasn't entirely sure what would happen if he approached it, but instinct told him it was dangerous, so he stood his ground and waited cautiously. However, after a tense moment, Lucy sighed and dispelled the spell completely. Seeing Beryl remain perfectly composed even when faced with such powerful magic, made her realize continuing was pointless. Admitting she'd taken things too far, Lucy apologized sincerely, and told him they could call the fight for the day. Beryl felt immensely relieved now that his duel with Lucy was finally over, and it had been nerve-wracking to face someone as formidable as her. Curiosity soon got the better of him though, and he asked Lucy what would have happened if she'd actually unleashed that last spell. Lucy casually explained that, in theory, the spell would have ripped his body to shreds. Still, she now understood why Ficelle admired him so deeply. Any ordinary person witnessing that spell would have fainted on the spot. This was the first time she'd encountered a swordsman who'd keep his composure so effortlessly. Feeling genuinely remorseful for dragging him into an unexpected fight, Lucy invited him to the Magic Institute later, promising she'd personally make it up to him. Later that day, Beryl went about his usual routine, instructing the students at the training hall. During his break, he coincidentally ran into Ficelle in a hallway, who had come by to deliver healing potions from the Magic Institute. She offered Beryl a potion, insisting he take it as an apology for Lucy's earlier behavior. Beryl initially tried to refuse, knowing just how expensive healing potions could be, but Ficelle reassured him it was on the house this time. Beryl admitted to Ficelle that up until now, he'd been half convinced Lucy really was just a young girl. Ficelle laughed and clarified that Lucy used magic to maintain her youthful appearance. Her real age was anyone's guess. Still, Beryl found it incredible that someone so small could hold so much power. He confessed he genuinely feared for his life during their duel, and that he had no desire to face another wizard anytime soon. Ficelle assured him Lucy was a unique exception. Most wizards couldn't cast spells as rapidly or continuously as she did. Ficelle was confident Beryl could easily handle himself against the average wizard. At that moment, Alicia arrived, interrupting their conversation. She informed Beryl that he had just received a special request. Intrigued, Beryl followed her into another room, where they find Serena waiting. She explained that the Adventurers Guild had specifically asked Beryl to organize special training sessions for the newest adventurers, helping them prepare for their first dungeon exploration. The mention of rookie adventurers stirred up old memories for Beryl, reminding him of his own youthful dreams. Once upon a time, he'd aspired to become an adventurer himself, excited by the valuable treasures found in dungeons. But that dream didn't last long because he got his ass handed to him by monsters on day one and ran back home with a busted ego. And that was the end of his adventuring career. Beryl shared his concerns with Serena and Alicia, pointing out that adventuring was a dangerous occupation. But that was precisely why they wanted him to handle the new adventurers training. They assured him that all necessary preparations had already been taken care of, and the task wouldn't interfere with his existing role as a special instructor. In other words, there was nothing stopping him from accepting. Still, the final decision rested with Beryl, so Serena suggested he come to the Adventurers Guild and discuss the job directly with the guild master. Since the Adventurers Guild was close by, Serena led Beryl there immediately, and upon entering the guildmaster's office, Beryl was taken aback to find Lucy already sitting on the couch, waiting for him like it's totally normal. Turns out she caught wind of the job offer, and since she and the guildmaster go way back, she sprinted over the second she heard about it because she was eager for another chance to meet him again. Shortly afterward, the guildmaster Nidus introduced himself warmly. After hearing so many good things about Beryl from Serena and Lucy, Nidus was absolutely convinced they'd chosen the perfect candidate. Beryl attempted to remind Nidus that he hadn't actually agreed to take the job yet, but Nidus cheerfully ignored his protests. Nidus then gestured toward his assistant Mei-Jin, instructing Beryl to speak with him about the specifics of the job. However, before discussing anything else, Mei-Jin wanted to clarify a few important points. He asked Beryl if he had any prior experience as an adventurer. Beryl honestly answered no, causing Mei-Jin to question whether he was truly qualified to instruct new adventurers. Beryl inwardly felt relieved at this skepticism, hoping it might provide him an excuse to avoid accepting the job. However, Megan's doubts immediately irritated Serena and Lucy, who had both strongly vouched for Beryl. Mei-Jin calmly explained that he wasn't questioning Beryl's reputation out of disrespect. He simply wanted to ensure the adventurers' safety, especially since there had been recent reports of unusual monster activity. Nidus understood Megan's concerns and asked what Beryl would need to do in order to prove himself. After thinking for a moment, Mei-Jin declared that if Beryl could win a duel against Serena, who held a prestigious black rank, he'd acknowledge Beryl's qualifications. Serena enthusiastically agreed to the proposal, leaving Beryl with no room to argue. Seeing that everyone was on board, Nidus decided to arrange the duel immediately. Not long after, Beryl and Serena were already standing face to face on the training grounds, surrounded by a large, enthusiastic crowd. Everyone was eager to see the legendary Serena in action and to find out exactly who her opponent was. Serena herself could hardly contain her excitement, thrilled by the opportunity to cross swords with her master once again. Back when Serena was just a kid, she and her parents were traveling with a merchant caravan. During their journey, however, the caravan was suddenly attacked by a beast that tore the carriage apart. In a final desperate act to save their daughter, her parents threw her off a nearby cliff, making her the only one to survive that tragic day. When she finally regained consciousness, the first thing she saw was Beryl standing over her. He gently took Serena back to his house, carefully treating her wounds, and once she had begun to recover, he started asking her some gentle questions. She managed to tell him her name was Serena, but the moment he brought up her parents, she quickly became overwhelmed with panic. Noticing her distress, Beryl told her to forget the questions and just rest until she was ready. With no place else to go, Beryl approached his parents to see if they'd be willing to let her stay with them, at least until they found her a new home. His parents happily agreed, and from that moment onward, Serena practically became part of their family. Initially, she struggled to open up and felt unsure about her new environment, but one morning, she caught sight of Beryl training diligently with his sword outside. Noticing her interest, Beryl warmly invited her to join him, sensing it might help her come out of her shell. From then on, Serena spent as much time as she could training alongside Beryl, as he patiently taught her the fundamentals of swordsmanship. The bond between the two grew stronger day by day. Gradually, Serena started becoming more outgoing and confident. One morning, as Beryl was preparing for classes at his dojo, he found Serena already waiting outside, sword in hand, eager to train. With a smile, he invited her to join the class, pleased to see how seriously she took her training. Serena had grown deeply attached to Beryl and his family, and would have been content to stay forever. Eventually, though, a family arrived, willing to adopt her. Beryl and his parents believed that moving in with a new family was best for Serena's future, so they gently encouraged her to go. But deep down, Serena truly didn't want to leave, yet she didn't want to burden Beryl either, so she thanked him sincerely for everything and reluctantly went her own way. Several years later, Serena had already become a skilled, gold-ranked adventurer. While on an escort mission, her caravan was suddenly ambushed by a group of bandits led by a swordsman infamous for his deadly skills. Her teammate warned her to be cautious. But before he even finished speaking, Serena had already leaped fearlessly into battle, quickly defeating every bandit there without breaking a sweat. There were two main reasons Serena had chosen to become an adventurer. Firstly, she was driven by a desire to prevent others from experiencing the same kind of tragedy she endured. Secondly, she wanted to honor everything Beryl taught her by putting her skills to real use. Now, with the opportunity to duel her former mentor after 20 long years, she was determined to show him just how far she'd come. Beryl isn't exactly thrilled about the duel, but the excitement on Serena's face was unmistakable. As her former master, he felt it was his duty to give her a fight worth remembering. As the match began, Serena launches herself forward, unleashing a relentless barrage of swift and precise sword strikes. Her movements were incredibly fast, yet Beryl matched each of them effortlessly, leaving her unable to land even a single blow. Serena's excitement only grew as they fought, enjoying every second of the chance to battle someone at full strength without holding back. For his part, Beryl was genuinely proud to see how far Serena had come. It was clear she dedicated herself fully to training ever since she left him. But she's not quite flawless yet because he spots a slight stiffness in her left-hand swings. It's subtle, but enough for him to exploit. With perfect timing, he slipped his sword through the handle of her blade, disarming her in one swift move. Serena quickly tried to counterattack with her other sword, but Beryl smoothly swept her legs from beneath her, leaving her sprawled on the ground with his blade pointed gently at her neck. With that, Beryl officially won the duel. The audience around them erupted into applause, and the others quickly came down to congratulate him. Mei Jen approached, sincerely apologizing for ever doubting Beryl's abilities. Beryl brushed it off kindly, assuring him it was completely normal to be skeptical of a teacher he'd never seen in action. Now fully convinced of Beryl's strength, Mei Jen gladly welcomed him as the guild's special instructor. The next morning, Beryl found himself standing in front of a dungeon entrance with his new adventurous students, Porta, Nadrai, and Sarlacats. As they ventured into the dungeon, Sarlacat's magic watch began to glow, warning them of 6 monsters lying ahead. The students immediately prepared for battle. Beryl and Serena were there only to oversee their safety, so they stepped back, allowing the students to handle the monsters on their own. The three quickly engaged with the goblins and managed to defeat them swiftly, demonstrating impressive teamwork and coordination. As they continued deeper into the dungeon, the rest of the exploration went smoothly. Soon enough, they had explored the entire dungeon without any serious incidents, and began to make their way back toward the entrance. While returning, Beryl felt slightly uneasy, noticing there seemed to be fewer monsters than he expected. Suddenly, as Porta moved toward the dungeon's exit, Sarlacat's magic watch violently shattered, detecting something far more powerful than it was designed for. Beryl urgently shouted a warning to Porta, but it was too late because Porta was suddenly grabbed by the unseen threat. The young adventurer was badly wounded, but still alive, desperately in need of immediate medical attention. However, Beryl and Serena knew they couldn't help him until the powerful creature was dealt with first, and that wouldn't be easy. Standing before them was a legendary monster known as the Xenograble, a specially designated target infamous for its terrifying strength. Even the most seasoned adventurers would struggle to survive an encounter with such a beast, yet there was no choice. Beryl and Serena prepared themselves, ready to fight for their lives.